Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 1 through 11. Hear the word of the Lord. When you have come into the land that Yahweh your God is giving you as an inheritance to possess, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from the land that Yahweh your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place that Yahweh your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. You shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, "Today I declare to Yahweh your God that I have come into the land that Yahweh swore to our ancestors to give us." When the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of Yahweh your God, you shall make this response before Yahweh your God. A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as a foreigner, few in number, and there he grew and became a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried to Yahweh, the God of our ancestors. Yahweh heard our voice, saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. Yahweh brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. And he brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground that you, O Yahweh, have given me. You shall set it down before Yahweh your God and bow down before Yahweh your God. Then you, together with the Levites and the foreigners who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that Yahweh your God has given to you and your house. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Whom is it for? It's a question we don't always voice, even when perhaps we should. Ownership is a concept we teach our children at a very early age. Perhaps it's because of that early teaching that we don't often talk about ownership as adults. We have ingrained concepts about ownership and use that are passed down to us on almost an emotional level, such that we often don't address them openly. As a result, growing up amid a mix of cultures, I find that I have at times embraced competing notions about ownership and fair use that are not shared by all. Perhaps it's because of my particular standing that I find myself included at times in ways others are not. For whom are the blessings and bounty around us? Who is invited to partake and participate? I grew up with the notion that wooded land was common property. It was somehow unclaimed, as if I were living in Western frontier lands with Daniel Boone. No one told me an empty lot did not belong to anyone. I just applied notions I gathered from shows about the Old West and American frontiersmen to my own surroundings. No one bothered to tell me any different. The woods were there. I played in them, and I somehow took ownership of them until someone finished constructing a house in one of my play areas. Even as construction workers erected a new house, no one begrudged my exploring its depths. It was there, I was there, no one excluded me. Today's passage in Deuteronomy presents this a little differently. The land had been given to the Hebrew people as an inheritance. They were to settle it and take possession of it. They were to collect the produce of the land, and bring a portion of that bounty before Yahweh as though they were simply caretakers of the land, serving somehow akin to sharecroppers. The land would produce a bounty not simply to provide for the well-being of those tending the fields, but for everyone else. What was brought before Yahweh was for the welfare of the priests and Levites, and for everyone else, including foreigners living in the land. Technically, they were all aliens, foreigners, immigrants. The land had not been theirs. They had no citizenship claim. They had no historic ties to it. They had no titles or deeds. They had not purchased it from others. Yahweh had brought them into this land to establish a different way of living and relating to the land and to one another. It was for the benefit of all, without exclusion. When it came time to celebrate all Yahweh had bestowed upon them, everyone was to participate in Yahweh's bounty. This celebration of Yahweh's bounty was to begin with a reminder of their ancestral roots as nomads. No land claim as their own. Aramean nomads were my ancestors was the beginning of their declaration of faith in Yahweh. It was a reminder of where they had come from and how they had come to be caretakers of this land of Yahweh's. Their new starting would be the result of Yahweh's grace. They had been nothing in the eyes of all, yet Yahweh had made them a great nation and was granting them a land where they might put down roots. The agreement, however, required they use it according to a new pattern the world had not shown them. When they gathered with the first fruits of the land, they were to celebrate Yahweh's bounty by sharing it with everyone, specifically including those with no claim to the land. Those who could not provide for themselves were pointedly included in this required celebration before Yahweh. This was a vastly different economic plan and structure than our own. Economic activity and wealth production was tied to the land and its produce. This command would have been the equivalent of corporations like Saudi Aramco, Berkshire Hathaway, Apple, and Google announcing profit-sharing programs specifically to benefit the world's unemployed. The biggest difference here is that in Yahweh's economy, such a profit-sharing notion was baked into the base requirements of economic participation in Yahweh's provision. The principles and concerns of Yahweh's economy are far different from our own. Rather than stock buyback programs to increase profit margins for corporate leaders, Yahweh's design built profit sharing into the very DNA of this agriculturally based economy. All were to have access to the land as a means of producing wealth, just as all were to have access to the fruits of that wealth production. The sharing of Yahweh's bounty was to extend beyond definitions of citizenship, embracing people who were passing through or taking up residence as immigrants, refugees, or migrants. Being in the land Yahweh had provided was enough grounds for enjoying its benefits. After all, it was Yahweh's land, and its bounty was for everyone. Before the people had ever made it out of their wilderness wandering, before they had reached the land promised to Abraham, before they had stepped foot across the Jordan, before they had considered how Yahweh would deliver the land into their control, these economic principles were already laid down as the law of the land. This was Yahweh's requirement. This was prerequisite for participation as caretakers of Yahweh's land flowing with milk and honey. There's a lot of uncertainty about how well the nation ever followed through after claiming title to the land. After all, there are lots of prophetic writings calling the nation down for its failure to care for widow, orphan, poor, infirm, outcast, and immigrant. Ezekiel calls out economic oppression as the sin of Sodom. Isaiah chastises all sorts of nations for their failure to provide for those in need, including Israel and Judah. Job defends his righteousness on the basis of his just treatment of widows and orphans, eating from his own table. When we turn to the Gospels, we are confronted with abundant examples of people suffering in need while the wealthy turn a blind eye. From the perspective of Yahweh presented here in Deuteronomy, righteousness and the prosperity of the land were inseparably linked. As one prospers, so one shares. It is in that sharing that one fulfills the righteous demand and requirement of Yahweh. This is how we are supposed to live. This is how we're supposed to operate, regardless of what our society, heritage, tradition, or culture may have told us. Under Yahweh's guidance, indeed, Yahweh's rules for living, the bounty at our hands was never ours to use for personal benefit to the exclusion of others. How easy it is for us to lose sight of that principle. We're constantly inundated with messages that strike a very different chord. We hear talk of rugged individualism, of rising to the top of the heap, of getting ahead of others, of protecting what is our own. When we drill down deeper, the greater blessings are when we are able to share with others. Ebenezer Scrooge was so much happier bringing a feast to the home of Bob Cratchit than he ever was eating a miserly meal in his darkened rooms. The real joy of Yahweh's provision comes in sharing the bounty with others. When will we take that lesson to heart? I can cook an elaborate meal for myself, but spreading a table for others is always much more fulfilling. Including everyone in the benefits of God's blessing is where the real joy of God's provision begins. Why would we shortchange ourselves by not including everyone?